February 1945. As American troops landed on Iwo Jima and the Red Army advanced on the Eastern Front, something remarkable was unfolding far from the battlefields. In the heart of Belgrade, there, a group of men, players, students, police officers, and members of the Serbian United Anti-Fascist Youth League came together to form a youth physical culture society. Just weeks later, on March 4th, that society would be reborn under the name the world will never forget: Red Star Belgrade. Hello everyone and welcome back to History Football Club. My name is Cristian Putalias and welcome back to another episode. Today we have another great story for you guys. We have a story that has a lot of pain involved in it, a lot of politics, of course, as always, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. Today we're going to be talking about Red Star Belgrade, one of the great teams of East Europe, or Southeastern Europe, I guess we could say more specifically, a region that has been going through a lot of battles, literally battles, but a lot of stuff that has been hurting the people, a lot of chaos, and just a little bit of everything, right? But not everything is bad. Also, they had some days of glory, so hopefully you guys enjoy this. But yeah, let's get to it. Red Star Belgrade. It is the name that it was given to this organization that came, as you probably heard in the beginning, from a group of people, a group of men that got together in 1945. And not only that, but they had other names that were suggested. Red Star wasn't the first option, or wasn't the only option, I guess I would say. Some other people had People's Star, could be a name. Blue Star was another name, so how funny would that be? You know, you have Red Star. It could have been completely different if it was named Blue Star. Proletar or proletar was another term that was wanted to be used. It was a term that was given to the working class by Karl Marx. Other names were also Stalin or Lenin, and there was many more. But at the end of everything, Soren Sujovic and Slobodan Kosic were the ones who decided and assigned the name to the club. FK Crvena Zvezda. I wanted to say it the way that it was originally pronounced. So also to everybody that is listening, to my Serbian friends, I apologize if I don't get any of the names right, but I've been trying to at least get a couple of names right. And Crvena Zvezda is the Red Star Belgrade in its original language. So hopefully you guys, I did justice to that. And like I said, give me a little bit of grace when it comes to the names. I am an Argentinian with Spanish and some English. So hopefully I'm doing you guys a little bit of justice on that. So let's keep going with the story. Red Star soon became the symbol of Serbian nationalism inside of Yugoslavia. They played their first match in club history against the 1st Battalion of the 2nd Brigade of KNOJ, which is the People's Defense Corps of Yugoslavia, and they won 3-0 at the Avala playground. As I wrote down in my notes, that's something you really don't see every day, right? You don't see teams playing their first official match. Maybe it was a friendly match against literally a group of soldiers, a battalion of the 2nd, brigade of this defense of Yugoslavia. So it's something interesting. Also, it's interesting that it was played in a playground, right? Avala was a place in the area that had, if I'm not mistaken, it's also like a mountain. It's like some type of a national park per se, not necessarily that, but if you can picture it here in the U.S., it's kind of something like that. And there was a field there, and that's where they played. As the club was being founded, a man from Bela Palanka, from the southeastern part of Serbia, that would go on to represent Red Star brand to the world with his leadership and great pride, was being also forged alongside the mythical club. So as we go in right now, just in the beginning of the story of Belgrade, there is also another story being born not that far from Belgrade. Belgrade, it is, if I'm not mistaken, the capital city of Serbia. And just right south of that, in Bela Palanca, there was a man that was being born. His name was Rajko Mitic. A lot of people know his name. You probably have heard it. I think it is very important that we take a second and talk about his story, because not only is he a great soccer player in the history of world football, but also I think he goes hand in hand with Star Belgrade. So when you say, Rajko Mitic, when you say Red Star Belgrade, you basically kind of associate both of those. And I think it's a cool story to be told. So without further ado, let's talk about Mitic, and let's talk about his story and what he means to Red Star Belgrade. As the club was being founded and formed, a young man from Bela Palanca in southeastern Serbia, or how it's called at the time of his birth, Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, Rajko Mitic, will be joining Red Star Belgrade. Mitic was born on 19th of November of 1922, and as we mentioned, in Bela Palanca, and will start his career in football in Belgrade in 1938 at BSK Belgrade, where he played from 1938 till 1944. He started in the junior team of BSK, and then in 1940 he would be called up to the senior team, and he would score 2 goals in his debut. As we know, unfortunately, World War II will come by and take basically hold of the whole entire region, but he actually continued to play in the engineer squadron all of 1944. The next year, as Red Star was being founded, he joined, and Mitic became the captain of the team, in which he played 14 seasons. 14 seasons. That's insane. You don't see that type of loyalty nowadays, right? In 572 matches, he scored 262 goals. And in the 1950s, he became a household name, not only in the city of Belgrade, not only in the team of Red Star, but throughout the whole entire region. With him wearing the armband, Red Star won 5 league titles in 1951, 53, 56, 57, and 59, 1 Serbian national championship in 1945, 4 national cup titles in 48, 1949, 1950, and 1958, and also they won the regional Mitropa Cup in 1958. The man was known not only for being a great football player, but an amazing captain with strong leadership. For example, in 1957, Red Star was playing against Hajduk in Croatia when a fan threw a rock and hit one of the Red Star players. He decided to pull all the players out of the pitch, even with 20 minutes to be played. Because of that, the Football Association of Yugoslavia suspended most of the team, but even without appealing the decision of the federation, a lot of people praised Mitic for his bravery to do what he did to protect his players, his guys, He was also known to be very honorable man in the pitch. Apparently, he never pulled his opponent's shirt or tripped him or hurt him on purpose, which is something that you don't see often. Even if he wasn't the best or the most flashy player, or had the best style of play, lots of people remember him because of his chivalry and sportsmanship in and outside of the pitch. He also got to represent Yugoslavia in 59 different occasions. His first goal came in his national debut in 1946 when he scored against Czechoslovakia. Also, crazy to think about that, Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia don't exist as countries anymore. It's insane when you go back in history and you're like, man, that's crazy. Also, a fun fact, I don't know if you guys know, but there is a website called Old History Maps, if I'm not mistaken.com, and literally you can go in there and move the time bar on the bottom, and it kind of shows you the world as it was during that year. And it's wild to think that in that region, those countries kind of came and went in a way. It's crazy. Mitic played in 2 Olympic tournaments in London of 1948 and Helsinki in 1952, where he won a silver medal in both times. He also played in 2 World Cups, in Brazil 1950 and Switzerland 1954. But listen to this piece of history that, honestly, when I first read it, it completely blew my mind because I was not expecting to read this. As Mitic was getting ready to come out to the mythical Maracanã in Brazil to face Brazil for the World Cup in 1950, he actually hit his head against the middle lid and got a huge cut on his forehead. And he had to miss the first 20 minutes of the game. They say that he actually did not know what the score was till after to when they went back to halftime, to the back to the dressing rooms, and therefore, he had to miss the first 20 minutes because he wasn't able to start the game. And therefore, Yugoslavia had to play with 10 men for those starting 20 minutes, and you're probably wondering, why the team had to play with 10 men. Why he just come in later as a substitution, or, why Yugoslavia had to play with 10. And let me tell you this, another piece of history of soccer or football is that back in those days, there were actually no substitutions allowed in soccer. There was no substitutions allowed in football. You picked your starting 11, and if somebody got injured, well, guess what? You were shit out of luck, and you would have to play with 10 men. So imagine, you're in a World Cup, and one of your best players, probably your captain at the time, and is 1950. Mitic is probably at his prime as a soccer player, and not only that, as we heard, he was a heck of a person, a heck of a leader of a group of people. And the dude wasn't able to play the first 20 minutes because he was getting treated on his forehead for a giant cut that he had. And you have to start the game with 10 men. And that's when Brazil actually scores a goal against them. So barely in 1958, the International Football Association board would officially add 1 substitute to be allowed per match. In 1958, that's when actual subs came into the picture in football. That's crazy. In 1965-1966 season, the English Football League would allow 1 substitute due to injury, and in 1967-68 campaign, tactical subs were allowed, but it was just still 1 substitution. Imagine now, right, that we have 5 substitutions in 2025. If you only had 1, and it would have to be for either, it was either tactical or for injury. So if you made a tactical decision and then somebody got injured, then you're playing with 10. That's insane. In 1970, FIFA would actually would allow 2 subs for tactical or injury. So they, a couple of years later, they were like, well, you know what? Maybe we'll do 1 for each. And then barely jumping into 1994, I was born 2 years before this. They would allowed a 3rd for a goalkeeper injury. And then in 1995, 3 would be officially allowed for injury or tactical in normal time, which is kind of what we have, or at least myself, have grown up to kind of see it in the sport, right? 3 substitutions for whatever it may be, injury or tactical or whatever it may be. As we move forward into our time now in 2025, if we go turn the clock a few knobs to the left, back in 2020, as we know, it would be moved to 5 substitutions due to fatigue during the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, that had a toll in civilization as a whole, basically, and FIFA decided, which is the ruling, law, I guess, of the game, would allow to 5 substitutions. But let's go back to the mythical Raiko. He retired in 1957 from the national team, and then he retired in 1958 from football as a whole at the age of 36 after winning the Yugoslav Cup with Red Star Belgrade. After his retirement, he became part of the Red Star coaching staff from 1960 to 1966, and then in 1966, he joined the national team committee. In 1967, he got promoted as head coach of the national team, where in 1968, UEFA European Football Championship, they won the silver medal. He took them to a final, so he was good as a coach as well. He remained a head coach until 1970 of the national team, and then in 1983, he retired from the coaching and national team duties, and he came back to, as we say in Spanish, to el amor, to his first love, right? El amor de sus amores. Back to Red Star. He served twice as vice president of the club and he also wrote for sports magazine Tempo. Also, a fun fact, he would actually write articles for a daily newspaper called Sport back in the 50s when he was still a player. This dude was doing it all. The 50s were honestly a mythical time for Rajko Mitic. So Rajko, unfortunately, he would pass away back in March 29 of 2008 at the age of 85. And he would be considered one of the most important players in the history of Red Star. And actually, he is the first out of 5 players to be awarded the Zvezdina Zvezda, or as they call it, the Star of Star, or the Star's Star, which is basically a recognition of the club to players that have made the name of the club stand out around the world. So it's kind of like a Medal of Honor from Red Star Belgrade to some of their most recognizable people, and he happened to be the first one to receive this honor from the club itself. Lastly, to hold his legacy to the max, in December of 2014, a Red Star Stadium, as it was called then, was actually renamed to Rajko Mitic Stadium in his honor. And honestly, he was a true captain, a true star, a true Red Star as a person, as a coach, as a leader, as a captain, as everything. So that was a little story of Rajko Mitic. So now let's get back to Red Star Belgrade. In the first 15 years of existence, they won 1 Serbian championship, 6 Yugoslav championships, 5 Yugoslav cups, 1 Danube Cup, and reached the semifinal of the 1956-1957 Europe Cup, where they lost to Fiorentina 1-0 in the away match and unfortunately tied 1-1 at their home match. Fiorentina would later lose the final to Real Madrid. Another kind of sad piece of history that involves Red Star Belgrade, indirectly in a way, was when, after winning the league, they would win a direct pass to the European Cup in 1957-1958 campaign, where in the quarterfinals they would actually have to face no other than Manchester United. That was the era of the Busby Babes. Whenever we talk about Manchester, we'll kind of dive deep into the Busby Babes, and unfortunately, in one of the darkest days to be specific, in football history, as the Manchester United squad was heading back to England, their plane actually crashed in Munich, and 23 people would die in that crash, unfortunately, and it included 8 Manchester United players. It's an unfortunate event. As we said, it involved the Red Star because Manchester United was coming back from a game against them, and it just kind of sucks that, stuff like that happens. So we'll talk about it whenever we get to a Manchester United episode, but Busby Babes are something to kind of be remembered, and it's unfortunate that it happened. But jumping into the mid-60s and 1970s, this will be the Miljan Milijanic era. That was their coach. He was there from 1966 to 1974, and they won 4 Yugoslav championships, 3 Yugoslav cups, 2 Yugoslav Super Cups, 1 Yugoslav League Cup, 1 Metropol Cup, and they reached the semifinal of 1970-1971 European Cup. Also, fun fact, Yugoslavia means Yugo or Yug, the first part means south or southern, and Slavs obviously is like the group of people, so it means Slavs from the south, by the way. So it's something that my brain was eating me alive when I was reading. I like to know the mythology of the names of things, so it was interesting when I found out that it just means Southern Slavs, right? But yeah, cool story. We'll move on. In the 1973-1974 European Cup, Red Star Belgrade was eliminated, or actually they eliminated greats like Liverpool in the second round, and then Real Madrid in the 1974-1975 European Cup Winners' Cup quarterfinals. We jump to the Branko Stankovic era in 1978 to 1982. where he helped win 3 trophies and helped them reach their first UEFA Cup final in the 1978-1979 edition, beating teams like Arsenal, West Bromwich Albion, Hertha Berlin, or BSC. In the final, they would take on Borussia Mönchengladbach. That's a mouthful right there. Who had played European finals from 1973 to 1980. So honestly, a dynasty of a team, Borussia Mönchengladbach, back in the 70s, 80s. The first leg in Belgrade, the match would end up 1-1, but then in the second leg, Borussia would win in the minimal difference of 1-0 with what a lot of people consider to be a very questionable penalty kick by Italian referee Alberto Michelotti. And I'll be honest, I watched the video from this game, that play, and I'll be honest, Mr. Alberto Michelotti, I don't know what the heck he was looking at, but that was not a penalty. Red Star Belgrade, in my opinion, got robbed in that call, but what can you do in an era where the referee basically had all the power? And even though I am 100, I'll be honest, I am one of those people that is 100% against VAR, and I think it only messes up the spirit of the game. I think today, if they had VAR back in the day, that decision would not have been called, and it would have been overturned literally at the second that it happened. I think Michelotti had a wrong call, and Belgrade, unfortunately, or Red Star Belgrade, had suffered a loss from a terrible call, and that's just how it happened, right? But I think, I don't want to get too much into VAR, but I think it's kind of part of the spirit of the game, right? Having the referees being, obviously it sucks when it happens to your team that if the referee makes a mistake, but I think it's also part of the game to have the human error in it. A lot of people don't agree with me, and that's completely fine, but those are my 2 cents on VAR. Let's get back to Red Star. Another piece of history that involved the Red Star happened during the 1982-1983 European Cup Winners' Cup. These names were so long. Where they face a team like Barcelona. Well, where they faced Barcelona, to be exact. And some dude named Maradona was one of the players for this Barcelona. Barcelona not only outplayed the Serbians in that match, but Maradona had a Maradona moment. And honestly, if you have the chance to pause this episode right now and go type in on YouTube Maradona scores against Red Star Belgrade, you will not be disappointed. But let's just say that Maradona had a momento maradoniano, as we say in Argentina. Diego literally chipped the goalkeeper from outside the box to score in a, not just because I'm Argentinian, I'm being biased, but it was probably one of the best goals that I've ever seen in my life. I know we've seen a lot of goals or beautiful goals from Diego Maradona, but I think this one is up there and is one of those goals that a lot of people don't really remember or recognize or weren't around to watch it, to be honest, like myself. But if you're able to watch them, please go watch it. And this is the crazy part of that goal, that game was being played in Belgrade, in the arena or the stadium where Belgrade played, and in the Maracanã. They also call it Maracanã, which is funny because they spell it with a K, so it's very true to the Eastern European kind of language, right? Maracanã. It's not like and it's in honor of the Maracanã in Brazil, right? But obviously you got to change the letters. But it said that about 100,000 people were in the stadium that day, and 100,000 people stood up and applauded Maradona. And they do kind of do a little pan of the people in the stands, and you can actually see the people applaud. So it's not a crazy, it's not a fake, but just think about the moment. I remember when Messi scored against Real Madrid and Real Madrid fans were like clapping for Messi. I imagine it's something like that, but I can see the class from the Red Star Belgrade fans applauding such a beautiful goal. So if you have the chance, go, like I said, pause this video, go watch it, and I think you'll thank me. Obviously, it sucks that it was against a Red Star if you're a Red Star fan, but I guess I think we can all enjoy a beautiful goal. Goshko Sek, I hope I'm not killing that name, but I think I am, would take over the team in 1983 once again, as he had coached them back in 1976 to 1978. And he would win the championship as soon as he got back to the club, but he would later leave the club in 1985-86 campaign because of some controversy over match fixing during his tenure. And the waters got a little muddied a little bit. Let's just say that after the scandal that stained the club a little bit, the two men in charge of running the club, Dragan Zajic and Vladimir Zekkovic, put a plan in place to bring back the Red Star Belgrade to the main stage and compete with the big clubs of Europe. Once again, I apologize to all of my Serbian friends. I am trying my best to read the names. They named Belibor Vasovic as a head coach and acquired some good signings like Dragan Stokovic and Borislav Sektkovic. Belgrade would start their 5-year plan, which they developed with the help of Professor Dr. Valchko Aleksic. With one goal in mind, which was to lift a continental trophy. They, after so much drama going on, they were like, let's get something going. Let's get the best minds, of around here, and let's put them to work. We need to get back into European glory. And in 1987, they would reach a European quarterfinals. In 1989, they would get to the second round. And then in 1991, things would honestly change for the history of Belgrade. They would change forever. So as we dive into 1981, let's take a second here and actually explore what happened in the 1991 European Cup. So we are here. It is the 1990-1991 European Cup. And let me give you a little bit of background of what's going on here, right? So the campaign marked the return of English clubs back into the continental competition after the 5-year ban after Heysel Stadium disaster. If you guys listen to the Liverpool episode, you guys might remember that there was some sad stuff happening over there, and Liverpool. And not only Liverpool, but a lot of the English teams were actually banned from competing in UEFA competitions. But Liverpool was given an extra year. So Liverpool, even though they were the English champions that year, they were banned from competing or representing England because of that extra year. So they weren't able to represent England. So there was no English representation in this edition of the Cup. Netherlands was the other country that wasn't able to have their champion in the edition of the Cup, since the champions of that year were Ajax, and Ajax were not allowed to participate in the competition because of the poor behavior of the fans, in the previous editions of the tournament. So a lot of, as we get into the late 80s, early 90s, this is where a lot of hooliganism started popping off. And not only in England, but, it just kind of bled into Europe as a whole. And this is where UEFA was trying to get tighter when it came to, security. I don't know, whatever it is that they do, because I'll be honest, sometimes they don't do a great job. But the best way that they found to kind of deal with this was literally banning teams from competing. So there was no English teams and no Dutch teams, or at least the champions. In the round of 32, for Belgrade, they would beat Grasshopper from Switzerland and in a 5-2 global in the two legs. The round of 16, they would take on Rangers from Scotland. That was a 4-1 victory after the two legs. For the quarterfinal matchups, they would face Dynamo Dresden from Germany, and both games would end up 3-0 for a total of 6-0. And actually, on the second match, it would not finish because in the 78th minute, as Belgrade led the match, they were winning 2-1. Fans of the Dynamo Dresden team, or Dynamo Dresden, they wouldn't let Robert Prosinecki take a corner kick. They were like, hey, they were throwing stuff at him, and they were just trying to, the dude couldn't kick a corner kick. So the referee said, you know what, hey, let's stop the game. let's see if we can get these people to, calm down and, chill. Let this man, hit the corner kick. I know you guys are losing, and I know the game is almost finished, but, and you guys are down and the global, don't be mad. And what did the fans do? They started throwing more things, and then they actually hit the linesman with things. So the referee said, this game probably will not change, so we're just going to close it here, shut it down, and I'm going to award Belgrade a 3-0 victory. So that made it a 6-0 instead of a 5-1 that probably would have ended up as. That was the quarterfinals for Red Star Belgrade. And the semifinal, they would have to go against another German team, and this time it would be a tough one, Bayern Munich. After a 2-1 victory in the first leg, the second leg would end up 2-2. So Belgrade obviously would go on through in a 4-3. And the final would be an interesting one, as they would have to face Marseille from France. So let's take a look at what Marseille had to kind of do to get to this final. So on the other side, Marseille would have to face Milan in the quarterfinals. In the first leg, they would finish 1-1. And then in the second leg, they will go up 1-0 when actually some of the lights will go out in the stadium. Not the whole lights, like the whole entire going dark, but some of the floodlights, and it would make it just a little bit harder to kind of see. So Milan actually refused to finish the match when the lights were fixed and they came back on. So they actually were able to fix them. But Milan said, you know what, it's been too long. We don't even want to play anymore. So Marseille said, all right, we'll take the victory. 3-0 for them, and obviously they moved on. Later on, Marseille, they would go on to beat Sparta Moscow in the semifinals in a 5-2 scoreline. And finally, we get to the final, Red Star Belgrade against Marseille, two teams that had never reached the European final. And now, obviously, both of these teams will have the chance to lift the trophy for the first time in their history. They were one of these teams that was going to become champions of Europe for the first time in their history. And I can just imagine like the nerves and everything that kind of goes in and all of that, the pressure, because not only you represent, your team, but you represent a country, you represent a continent at the end, and just, oh man, it's crazy. It's crazy. So May 29 of 1991, this final will be played. 51,587 souls in Estadio San Nicola in Bari, Italy. After 90 minutes of football, the match ended 0-0. Oof, to make it even more tense. So they go to extra time. 30 more minutes will be played, and guess what? 0-0. So just to add more craziness and more nervousness and more itchiness to the 50,000+ people in the stadium, they would go to the penalty spot. And it would be crazy. So first it would be Red Star Belgrade. Prosinecki would be the one to step up and score the first one. And then the second one, obviously the first shot for Marseille would be from Amoros. And this would happen. Listen to this clip. So Amoros will take the first one for Marseille, but the captain, the goalkeeper for Red Star, Stojanovic, he would dive the right direction and save the PK. And as you heard it in that clip, imagine just, the the burst of excitement, the burst of just I don't even know how to say it into words, but just imagine being a fan, with your heart and your throat, and then just everything, and just man, to all you people that have been through a penalty shootout, I'm sure that you guys have experienced this moment of nervousness. I'm nervous now, and this game happened in 1991. I wasn't even alive. That's how crazy it is. Binic scored the second one. Then Cassoni scored for Marseille. Belodedici scored. And then Papin scored for Marseille. Mihalovic scored for Red Star, and then Moser scored for the other team. And then the final and the fifth and final PK will come to Red Star. If they score this one, they would become champions. They would lift the trophy. And the striker, Pansev, I think that's the way that he's, we're going to say his name, Pansev. He would step up to take the most important penalty kick in the history of Red Star. And I guess we could say in the history of Yugoslavia, or in the history of Serbia, in the history of the Serbians as people. And he would score. So Red Star Belgrade will go up to beat Marseille in a penalty shootout, and they would become the European champions for the first time in their history. Later that year, not only were they not content with being the European champions, but in December 8th of that same year, Red Star will travel to Tokyo, Japan, to play the Intercontinental Cup against Copa Libertadores winners of that same year, Colo-Colo of Chile, and the game would end up 3-0 in favor of the Europeans, with a brace from Jugovic, who would be named man of the match, and the third goal by no other than Pansev, who obviously scored the decisive penalty shot against Marseille. 62,000 fans in attendance for the match in Tokyo, and 1991 would go down as the best year of the history of the club. But unfortunately, the rest of the 90s would look a little bit different. So let's dive into that. In 1992, with the team flying high from the previous year, a lot of European giants came knocking, and as business of football is, and how it usually works, a lot of Red Star players would be sold around the continent for a very good amount of money, but also that meant that now the team had to defend the title of European champions with a lot of departures, and of course, bringing in a lot of new players that would take time to kind of gel together. And the 1991-1992 European Cup would change in format, and it would be two groups of 4 teams. Red Star would have to play their games abroad due to wars breaking out in Yugoslavia. They would play matches in Szeged and Budapest in Hungary, Sofia in Bulgaria, and they still managed to come out actually second in their group. On the local level of things, they were a little bit different because Yugoslavia was actually breaking up as a nation and new nations were being born. The Yugoslav wars started in March of 1991, and after a decade of series of conflicts, a number of deaths of around 130 to 140,000 people, and around more than 4 million people fleeing the region because of the conflicts between ethnic groups and the region ceased, and new countries were actually being born at this time. So countries like Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Macedonia, that we now call North Macedonia, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, which later will be known as Serbia and Montenegro in 2003. Obviously, this is a lot of history going on in this specific time, so I think it's important for us to kind of take a little pause here and talk a little bit history to kind of put some things in perspective into the history of what's going on in the region, and also how this will affect Red Star Belgrade. It's pre-World War I. You had the Austro-Hungarian Empire ruling a lot of the region. As they go into World War I against the German Empire, things started to shift in Europe. The Kingdom of the Serbs and Croats and Slovenes begins in 1918. That's how back we kind of have to go to reference what's going on in the 90s with Red Star Belgrade. In 1922, at a conference in Paris, the kingdom was recognized and later renamed the Kingdom of Yugoslavia on 1929. Alexander I had taken power in 1921 after his father's death, but then he would be assassinated in 1934. Prince Paul would command until Alexander's son will become of age and he would take power. The son of Alexander would be Peter II. And when I say that Prince Paul would, command until Peter II was of age, I mean that he was actually overthrown. He didn't just give up the power. As we know, when we get a little bit of power, it's kind of hard to let go. And all this happened in March of 1941. But then on April of 1941 would come around, and a small group of nations known as the Axis powers, you probably will recognize them as the Nazi Germany, Kingdom of Italy, and the Empire of Japan, will invade Yugoslavia, marking the start of World War II in Yugoslavia. In 1943, with a communist-led resistance and with the backing of the Allies, Yugoslavians would take their country back from the Axis powers. And in 1944, Josip Broz Tito would be the first prime minister, and he would later be named president. Tito will rule from 1944 until 1980, so that's almost 40 years of rule. As you might imagine, ruling for that long, there was a lot of tension in the region during Tito's rule, but once he passed away, it seemed like that gave the different groups of people the freedom to finally branch out and become their own countries and independent communities. But unfortunately, it would come in violent forms, as I mentioned before, and the Yugoslav wars. So this is kind of the background of what's going on, to kind of give you a history that literally goes back to 1918. War after war, or battle after battle, or invasion after invasion, and then groups of people fighting each other because they're similar but they're different, and they live in a similar plot of land, or in a close by proximity, and sometimes they just don't get along, and a lot of the things were happening. I mean, I think till today when Croatia plays Serbia, it's very heated, and a lot of these stuff that happened throughout history, it just kind of still remains in the heart and the minds of Serbians and Croats to this day. And it's crazy that, history from so far ago can still impact that and impact how a football team basically goes on to the world and operates, basically. As we saw that little bit of history, let's get back into Red Star and everything that they have going on in 1990s. As we just talked about, with countries forming, the league was also changing as teams were actually leaving the competition, the domestic championship in the region. And with that going on May of 1992, Yugoslav football was not permitted to play international competitions. It's crazy to think that the Yugoslavian national team competed in the first World Cup ever in 1930 in Uruguay, finishing in 4th place, and now today in 2025, it doesn't even exist as a country. Yugoslavia as a nation played their last World Cup in 1998. But if it wasn't crazy enough, Serbia and Montenegro actually played under the Yugoslavian name until 2003. When they renamed the country and the team to Serbia and Montenegro. There was some representation of the country until then. Now, obviously, we see that in Serbia and Montenegro. In the period of 1992 to 2000, Red Star only won one championship in the 1994-1995 season, but they also did win 9 Yugoslavia Cups in the 15 years that it was played between 92 and 2003. Another big moment for them was in 1996 when in the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup, when they would face a Barcelona that featured greats like, the old school Ronaldo, Hristo Stoichkov. I can't even pronounce his name, and it's funny because he's on the Spanish broadcast for Univision here, a channel in the US, and he's always there. So it's funny that I know him by Cristo, but I can't really pronounce his last name. And then you had Figo, and then you had guys like Guardiola playing in this Barcelona as well. The first match would be a 3-1 victory for the Gules in Camp Nou, with 73,000 people in attendance. And then the second leg in Belgrade, Red Star will fall short in a 1-1 match. Barcelona would go on to win the competition that year. In the 2001-2002 season, Red Star Belgrade would be back in the European competitions when they made the qualifying rounds of the Champions League, but unfortunately will get beat by Bayer Leverkusen. Following that, Muslin, the coach that Red Star had at the time, would step down, and unfortunately the team will go through a series of not so good years. Jumping into the quote-unquote modern era in 2006-2007, once again Red Star would make the Champions League qualifying rounds, but would be eliminated by AC Milan, who would actually go and eventually win the whole competition in that year. They also wouldn't have a good Champions League campaign the next year, but after a while of lifting a trophy, Red Star would win their 26th league title in 2013-2014 season. But unfortunately, all this success would be stained for some off the field issues. Even though they had won Serbian Superligas, they were banned by UEFA for some financial issues that the club was going through. The club owed players money. They actually owed 6 months of pay, but not only the players, but they owed the club staff and actually other clubs from different transactions. All this debt that they had added up to 1.86 million euros. So imagine going into this, and this is pretty recent, so that's a lot of money. On top of everything, the club board was apparently hiding other debts and falsifying documents, allegedly. But this wasn't the first time that the club was punished by UEFA. Back in 2011, the club did not meet the club licensing and financial fair play criteria, and they weren't granted a UEFA license by the Serbian Football Association, and their spot in the Champions League qualifying round was given to the rivals, to Partizan. They were like, hey, you know what? You guys have a lot of issues going on. The spot that you earned playing, we're going to give it to the people that you don't like. So since we brought up Partizan, I think this is actually a great time to talk about this specific issue. Not issue, but as I always say, a true rivalry, one of the greatest rivalries in the world. I always say this when it comes to rivalry, but I think this is one of those great ones. Even the name is badass. The Eternal Derby. Besiti Derby. The Eternal Derby. So without further ado, let's take a dive into what the Eternal Derby is. Red Star Partizan. Partizan Red Star. It has been described as one of Europeans' most bitter rivalries. It's one of those rivalries that not only happens in football, but it actually bleeds into other sports. So you have to remember that some of these clubs in Europe and parts of South America, they're like sports clubs. They're social clubs, right? So not only you have the soccer team, but you have basketball teams, you have volleyball teams, you have a gazillion other sports that are included in this social club that they have. And this particular rivalry, like I said, not only happens in the football field, but it also happens in like basketball. The basketball games are insane in Serbia, like especially when Partizan plays Belgrade. Belgrade has to play Partizan. The stands for a basketball game, it's not like NBA style when everybody's clapping and cheering and nothing. No, we're talking about flares. We're talking about flags. We're talking about choreographed songs. We're talking about anything. There's a great documentary in Copa 90. I recommend everybody watching. I don't know if you guys like those type of things, but shout out to Eli, the guy that kind of is one of the creative directors for Copa 90 team. Shout out to those guys because they made this video like 10 years ago, but I think it holds true and still holds strong to this day. So if you have time, go watch it. But let me give you a little bit of rivalry, because it's crazy to think that this rivalry, it goes back to even before the clubs were born. So let me give you some background. So pre-World War II, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia had two football clubs that had a fierce rivalry. BSK Belgrade, and you probably heard it when we mentioned Rajko Mitić, and SK Jugoslavia. Jugoslavia was actually disbanded in 1945 by the new communist authorities, where all their properties were nationalized and were giving over to the newly formed Red Star. One club basically became Red Star, a little bit kind of like that, right? BSK, on the other hand, were able to continue in their existence, but under new authorities and with some of name changes that ended up being OFK Beograd in 1957. It made a lot of those supporters basically switch over to a new club that it was named Partizan. Partizan was founded by the Yugoslav People's Army, which was basically the Yugoslavian army. So to kind of put it into smaller words, if I possibly can, there's two teams where they existed as the wars kind of, World War II basically came into be. They kind of faded away, and then those fans, they basically needed somewhere to kind of put their loyalty behind, and then Red Star became one of them, and then Partizan became one of them, which came from these people. So one of them was, by the Yugoslav army, which is Partizan, and then on the other side, a lot of people say that is a club formed by police officers, by members of the community and other groups, which is Red Star. So it's kind of like the police, local police per se, and then the national army. But unfortunately, as sometimes it happens in these rivalries, there was some violence between both sides of supporters. And actually, there's this thing that I read from the BBC, and I think it was very interesting. So I'm gonna read it to you guys. So here it goes. The Belgrade Derby has a long association with violence, mostly notably in 1999 when a teenage Red Star fan was killed by a rocket fire by Partizan fans. In 1913, 104 arrests were made following clashes before, during, and afterwards. And in another derby that year, fans set fire to the seats during the game. A 2015 derby was delayed for 45 minutes because of crowd trouble, with fans throwing seats and flares at riot police. When the game got underway, fans threw stun grenades onto the track around the pitch. Despite all of this, journalist Nikolic claims it's a bit calmer nowadays than it used to be. Quote, "There is no violence of the magnitude like in the 1990s or at the start of the 21st century anymore, mostly because police are more ready than ever. And we have new pretty harsh laws against those who commit violence at sports," unquote. If you also watch the documentary that I just recommended from Eli and Copa 90 team, you're going to see that before the matches or the derbies are played, the eternal derbies between Partizan and Belgrade, there is a lot of police presence in and around the city. Also, imagine this. The clubs, the stadiums for the clubs are less than a mile away from each other. They're a 10-minute walk away from each other. How crazy is that? They, I guess I can say, hate each other so much, but they are so close together. It's crazy how sometimes you you dislike the people that are so close to you in a way, right? But I'm glad that both of these teams, or at least the fans, is not getting out of hand as it used to be in the 1990s or maybe early 2000s. That the violence has subsued a little bit and it's not as crazy as it has. I'm glad that I guess the police has been able to manage it. Obviously, we love the game and it sucks when it gets stained, but I think a awesome rivalry like this, when you have chants, when you have flags, when you have people yelling, when you have tifos, when you have all these things that bring the common person to a football field to support a team that they love, I think it's one of the most amazing things. As a person that earlier this year in 2025, me and my dad, me and my father, we drove from the city that we live here in Texas to Nashville, Tennessee, which is 12 hours with a flag that, represented us. And we put it there, we held it high. And, we loved our colors. We were following Boca Juniors, but that's another story. It's awesome to see that love, that people that travel, people that go, the people that take their time, people that take their sons, people that take, that share that love and passion. And it's cool to see that in a crazy fashion, but it's also, it's awesome to see that nothing kind of boils over and nobody has to die for the beautiful game, right? As crazy as rivalries are, I don't feel like anybody has to die for it. So let's hope that obviously the Eternal Derby stays the same way, but obviously bring out the flares, man. I love flares. I love the fire. I love the chanting. I love the flags and everything like that. So keep that going. Eternal Derby. Keep it going. Let's get back into Red Star Belgrade because we are getting close to the end. and there's still a little bit more history left. So let's get to it. In the 2017 and 2018 season, after years of being able to compete in international competitions, Red Star will return to compete in European football. They would qualify for the 2017-2018 UEFA Europa League group stage. They went through not one or two or even three, but actually 4 qualifying rounds and then reached the qualifying phase, becoming the first team to reach the qualifying rounds after starting the campaign in the first qualifying round. In 1918-1919, Red Star will eliminate Red Bull Salzburg in the playoff round of Champions League and made it to the group stage. This meant that Red Star was competing in this new format of Champions League for the first time since the last time that they played, which was back in the 1991-1992 season, before obviously Yugoslav teams were banned from playing and the competition was actually still known with a different name, the European Cup. So how crazy it is that they went from winning the competition in 1990-1991, they were literally banned in 1992, and it took forever for them to make it back again in 2018. So that's, I don't know how much math that is, but I think it's almost 30 years of history of ups and downs and again up, to make it back into the competition, which we know today as the Champions League. Even though they would finish last in their group with 2 losses to Paris Saint-Germain, a tie and a loss to Napoli, they would have to face Liverpool in England. They would lose their first game 4-0. But in November 6th of 2018, in front of 51,000 souls in Red Star Stadium in Belgrade, they would beat Liverpool 2-0 with a brace from Pavkov to become the first Serbian team to win a match in the Champions League. Talk about, small wins, but also wins that mean the world, to teams like this. Especially in a European team, competing against another giant like Liverpool. Liverpool of 2010, that's not that far long ago. These were teams that were, top notch. And they're making their mark. First Serbian team to win in a Champions League or a Champions League match. They will go back to the Champions League group stage in 2018-2019 after beating Suduba from Lithuania, HJK Helsinki from Finland, and then Copenhagen, Denmark, and finally Young Boys from Switzerland. Also that same year, the 1946 People's Republic of Serbia League title will be officially recognized, but the federation from the federation, which meant that their 2018-2019 Serbian Super League title was recognized as their 30th official title. In 2020 and 2021 will be a world record-setting season for Red Star, as they would have the longest winning run with 22 games, longest unbeaten run with 38 games, and 108 points would set the record for the most points won in a single season. Also, they had won their 8th Serbian Superliga title in a row and their 5th consecutive double in the 2024-2025 season. Currently, in 2025, Red Star sit in first place of the Serbian Super League as of today's recording for another consecutive title if they happen to win it. And of course, they are also competing in this year's edition of the Europa League. With 36 national championships, 29 national cups, 2 national super cups, 2 national league championships, the most successful club in Yugoslavia, now the most successful club in Serbia, the most successful club from the Balkans in the South and Southeast Europe, the only club to have both won the European Cup and the Intercontinental Cup from Serbia, one of 2 clubs in Eastern Europe to win the European Cup. This has been the story of the mighty Red Star Belgrade. And as always, don't forget that every batch tells a story, and here at History Football Club, we have just scratched the surface. If you enjoyed today's journey through football's past, follow the show, leave a review, say a prayer, and share it with someone who still believes in the beautiful game. My name is Cristian Pudalias, and this has been History Football Club, where football is history in motion.